Morgan, I am beyond thrilled, excited to have you here. I know folks just listen to the intro, which it's so easy for me to gas you up because I'm like, you are that girl. But can you give us just a little bit of background on like how you became a therapist, why you're kind of in this space and like the nuance and the specificity of like what it is that you do with clients? 'Cause I think that you are a different type of therapist. You're not just like the
Mm.
run of the mill
hmm
out here. So can you give us just a little bit of background on that too?
Yeah, for sure. So I specialize in treating the adult children of emotionally mature parents, both as a therapist, and obviously I work with the adult children of emotionally mature parents as a coach as well. So a ton of work in childhood trauma. And I specifically work with this subset of people because there's this weird thing that happens when you have an emotionally mature parent where you don't always know if what you went through was trauma because it doesn't always fit this like really flagrant and dramatic, stereotypical kind of presentation of quote unquote trauma, right? Sometimes there wasn't actual bruises, sometimes it's just not as stereotypical. So the stuff that happens in the home growing up, just a little more nuanced, it's a little more emotionally abusive and emotionally traumatic. So what ends up happening is you grow up thinking it's just a problem with you, that you're not good enough, that you should have tried harder, there's a problem with you, that you're defective. And so time and time again, I was meeting with people where I was really clearly pointing out like, hey, these things that happened to you in your childhood, like they're not okay. And actually, they're a reason why you're showing up this way in your adulthood. And people would really fight me on that, right? Because it doesn't make sense to them for a number of reasons, but one of it being, but on the outside, my parent was fine. Like they came to the PTA meetings and to everybody else, they were like so smart and intelligent and nice and kind, but then at home, all of these things were going on. So it was really important for me as a therapist to like bring that forward and to be able to say, like, no, no, all of this other stuff that may not look like broken bones or may not look like pure abandonment, like that's trauma too. I think the other piece, like the reason I care so much about this topic is because it really forces you when you have an emotionally mature parent to abandon yourself. There's a whole kind of survivor self that you have to develop to be okay in your childhood home. And if no one pauses you along the way, like as you grow up to say, hey, like, do you even want to be this person anymore? Then you just end up being this person for the rest of your life. And
Yeah.
that's exhausting. So those are the two big reasons why I even do this work.
Man, can we pause? I'm like, I want to make sure that we're even level setting this because when I got introduced to your work, and it's like, my first thought was, how do I know my parent was immature? I'm like, Drisha, if you're asking that question, you probably already know the answer. Okay.
hmm
But what are some signals or signs when it isn't like the stereotypical forms of
hmm
abuse or like the bigger T trauma experiences? Like, how do you help your clients even, or just what are the signals or the signs of like, hey, this is probably if you find it fit this mold, or these are the patterns that we typically notice, or
hmm
this is how you're showing up as an adult when you just said like you typically abandon yourself, and that becomes
hmm
the mode of kind of how you're surviving through the world. Like, what are those initial signals that might be helpful for somebody to name or put language to?
Yeah, I think the specific childhood experiences to keep in mind are the ones where I mean, I define and I help people define like emotional immaturity as someone who can't actually deal with reality. Like a lot of work is going in to deny reality that maybe your parent was struggling with something. Sorry, I just need to adjust my volume here. Maybe your parent was struggling with something, and instead of actually facing that reality, instead of actually sitting in like the toughness of that reality, they took it out on you, they took it out on a partner. Um, there's a lot of kind of recruiting their children to really manage their own distress.
Wow.
Right. So there's that. And then there's also this other element where emotionally mature parents can be incredibly rejecting. So time and time again, you are trying to demonstrate to them, like, am I good enough? Do you see me? Can you acknowledge me? Can you be proud of me? And emotionally mature parents will reject those bids constantly over and over, which then forces us to really develop this survivor self where you're going to be performing, you're going to be really trying to achieve, you're going to be working really hard in your business or working really hard in your career to be someone who's super competent, who has it all together, only to still be rejected by your emotionally mature parent, right? So it's this hamster wheel we can get on of continuously trying to be chosen and trying to be hyper competent and hyper capable to prove to ourselves and to prove to ideally our parent that we are good enough. But since emotionally mature parents often don't come around to actually provide that unconditional positive regard, that thing we all need, where a parent says, no, I see you and I love you regardless of who you are, then we just stay on that hamster wheel, constantly trying to perform and achieve things. Even when our body is like screaming, hey, can you stop? Like, I can't keep living like this. We
Mm.
just keep going.
Man, I feel like I'm chuckling a little bit because I think about a lot of my peers or business owners that I know, clients that I have. I'm like some of the most successful people I know. I feel like you just read us like a book. Like it's almost like a recipe for when to harness in a certain way, it ends up leading to being the fuel source of really successful individuals. I'm not sure if you noticed something similar, but like, what does it look like when this type of trauma is showing up, especially in women, but especially in female business owners, when
Mhm.
they outwardly appear fine and polished and put together and whatever, but really maybe it's kind of like their survival version of them that is really
Mhm.
what's functioning. Like, how does that dynamic play out or show up?
It shows up well in a couple different ways. One being extreme burnout, but a functioning burnout. So you don't actually think you're burnt out because you can still check all the boxes, but inside your body's like, hey, this is
Mm.
awful. We hate this. And you're like, what do you mean? We just keep going. This is like how we live our life. So there's this kind of physiological burnout that will happen. But then there's also, I see often a ton of resentment, whether it's resentment towards your partner, resentment towards your employees or your contractors, resentment towards your VA that they couldn't deliver on this certain thing because you know exactly how to do it and you're super capable. But the moment somebody else makes a mistake, it's like so threatening to your own system that you become really angry or
Mm.
resentful. Does that
Ooh,
touch on
I
that?
think we need a pause right there. I feel like, especially earlier days in business, I
Mm-hmm.
used to get so activated when
Mm-hmm.
I would have a team member or a VA, and it's like I delegate this thing. I'm like, y'all, this is not rocket science. Sis, I
Mm-hmm.
need you to just to set up this Zapier automation.
Yeah.
Why are there so many errors? How is this not working correctly? And then I'm like, why is my response so big to
Mm-hmm.
something that really like it doesn't warrant that level of reaction? And before I just used to think like I can't hire good people. Like clearly what I'm doing, it's just one, it's easier for me to do it myself. Or two, like there are not, because of how high functioning and high capability I am, I'm just like I'm gonna just say this, y'all I feel terrible admitting this on record. But I'm like, people are just mediocre AF. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can't find somebody that can function at the caliber that I function at. And there used to
Mm-hmm.
be a huge like friction and dissonance I would have with hiring over and over and over again. I'm like, I feel like I was just running through VAs. Like I had a graveyard of people I had let go and fired because one mistake was enough. I couldn't handle it in my own body now looking back. It wasn't like this person was just learning a new skill set, but I didn't
Yeah.
give them space to learn. Or
No.
I would hire people that mirrored the behavior and characteristic parent patterns of my parents. And it's like you were just hiring
Mm.
people who are not capable, who don't have the capacity, and those are the people you keep bringing on board. Like those are my patterns.
So those are the two patterns I was going to say. Those are the two patterns that I work the most with. You're describing two things. The first being projection and the second being transference. Like though that's really the bread and butter
Name
of my
those two
work.
again. Cause I'm like, ooh, girl.
Especially when I'm doing business coaching. So this is where we do a ton of projection work, a work on projection, and a ton of transference work. So
So
projection being the
break that
first thing you
down
talked
for
about.
us.
Yeah. That part where you're saying, I would hire a VA and it's like, what, like everyone's just so mediocre. Like, why can't they get this done? And I want to be clear, like hiring is a delicate process. And yeah, there's some like realities and logistics to that. But this reaction you are describing is because you are seeing in your VA a part of yourself that you have disavowed, the part, who can't get it wrong, the part that has to be super capable, super competent, because that's how you survived, right? You,
Yeah.
you needed that. You really needed to be hyper capable. So the moment your VA gets it wrong and is not at the level that you are, it's not just like, oh, that was shitty. I can swear, right? That's okay.
Oh, girl, it's
Yeah.
an open podcast on here. Say whatever you need to say.
Right. So it's not just like, oh, that sucks or that was shitty. It's so threatening to your system because you are seeing in this person a part of yourself that you have completely disavowed and completely rejected because of your own survival. So now you are assigning to them attributes that you find so painful within yourself that you are simply not allowing to be here. right? And so they're threatening your whole sense of safety, your whole survival system comes into play when you see this kind of mediocre or not as competent version of yourself or of your VA. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Like I just remember that used to be a pattern I would play out. And then I started going to therapy again. And it's like, oh, you start getting some self-awareness here around it. But it didn't, like I always tell people, like, I feel like business was my biggest form of therapy. Like it was the gateway for me to find a safe space to like do this work of like navigating these dynamics. Cause I'm like, Drew, this is like you're treating a total stranger. Like imagine how you're like why you're having a difficult time establishing close girlfriends in your personal life. I'm like, I'll worry about the friendship thing a little bit later. Let me like try to fix it in this confined like environment where it's a paid transactional relationship. Like that
Hmm.
was my playground to practice back then, but it makes total sense.
Hmm.
And then a couple years in, probably like 7 or 8 hires in, my therapist is the one that brought it to my attention. And she's just like, you are hiring people that mirror the characteristic traits of your parents. Oh, and I was like,
Mm.
girl, you're not in my
Hmm.
business, but she read me for filth. But it was, I didn't
Yeah.
realize like, I thought that I was really good at compartmentalizing, which I was to some degree, but I'm like, there's certain stuff that doesn't get compartmentalized. It just shows up in a different space. And I'm like,
Hmm.
I keep out trying to outrun this work that I'm avoiding, and it's just now showing up in my business. And I'm like, what am I going to do with it? So, yes, this makes total
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, and that latter part you're describing, that's transference. So this idea that we are really projecting and bringing with us past relationship templates into new relationships subconsciously, right? That I am, and we all do this to a certain extent. It's not just people with trauma. To an extent, we're all subconsciously seeking out what we know. But when it comes to relational trauma, we're trying to master the event, right? It's why we'll choose a partner who may really resemble a neglectful parent. Because if I can get this partner to love me, if I can get this partner to do things differently, then I have mastered the event. Then I have changed the outcome. Repetition compulsion is another word that we'll use to describe this. But we can compulsively find the same type of person over and over again to prove a different outcome, to try and prove a different outcome. So the
Mm,
same thing with hiring people, right? Especially if we see how there's a need to kind of depend on a VA or a contractor, right? So we might hire someone who looks like the person who really could never be there for us because it's familiar and comfortable, and because we're subconsciously driven to see those traits and think maybe I can change them, or maybe this time it'll be different. If I can get, I don't know, Sammy, your VA, whoever, to show up for me, then it's gonna undo some of the hurt from my own parent never showing up for me
mm,
in ways like people will often talk about, your attachment style to your romantic partners, and that's really important. But if we're not also expanding that to your attachment, that same attachment style to your money or to your business, we have all of these blind spots then, right? Like if your attachment style isn't just how you attach to a romantic partner, it's how you relate to all relational objects in your world. And that includes your business
mm.
and that includes money.
Man, I feel like it includes money more, just as
Mm.
much as romantically. Like that is so good. I know somebody listening right now, like, I don't know who this Morgan girl is, but girl, we're what, 10 minutes, 15 minutes in? Oh my gosh. But like, so one thing else I hear you talk a lot about is the fight, flight, freeze, or
Mhm.
fawn responses. And like, one, can you just quickly break down what that means, just so that we're all kind of using similar language? But I'm really curious to know, like, we're like discussing how these patterns show up in business and how we show up as leaders, but like how does now this fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses, like how does that impact this larger dynamic of people undercharging, over delivering, people pleasing, like scope creep, this perfectionism, like how this stuff plays out and how we
Mhm.
like support our clients and how we run our businesses too.
Yeah, so the four Fs, if it's easier to kind
Yeah.
of call them that because I'll do that too. It's a lot of Fs. But those are kind of your textbook trauma responses. That happens when we experience a trigger or a really overwhelming threat, and the body decides this is really scary and really lethal. I need to override my intellectual conscious mind and actually just head straight into a trauma response. It's often not a choice to go into a trauma response. It's just a full body reaction, right?
Okay.
So fighting often, especially when I'm working with business owners, fighting often looks like it's interesting, because the fight response can actually be really helpful in a lot of ways. Sometimes it looks like grit and resilience. Other times it looks like berating a VA or berating an employee or not giving up on a certain something that it's time to give up and move on to the next thing, right?
Mm,
You're battling, trying so hard to make something work. You refuse to quote unquote back down, or you refuse to change. Even though it might be the smarter, more strategic option to pivot, it's like I need to make this one thing work by any means necessary. That's
ooh,
usually how
yep.
the fight response shows up in business. The fawn response shows up by a ton of people pleasing, what people would call people pleasing. It shows up by really abandoning yourself and trying to make sure that the perception of you is positive, right? You might even lie. You might even
Mm,
wear something you wouldn't even normally wear, spend money on something you wouldn't normally spend money on because the perception of you and how you come across is extremely important. It's a ton of perception management, impression management. The freeze response is interesting because when you spend a ton of time in fight and fawn, what ends up happening is it's too overwhelming to your body that it will overshoot to try to get you to come back down into safety, but then you end up in a freeze response because it shot
mm,
you overshot basically. And that can look like doom scrolling. That can look like sitting on the couch having no idea like what your next move is, but feeling really kind of rigid and stuck inside your own body, right? It's this kind of total numbness inside. You're still upright, you're still kind of mobile, maybe even a little stiff when you're sitting in posture or when you're trying to even relax. You can't really release, but you
yeah.
can't do anything productive. You feel really frozen.
Mm,
And then there's the flight response. And this is where you might focus on those tasks or do those things that are actually not even needed right now. You might have that little side project you're working on the side of your desk, or you'll have those nice distractions and get lost in things that are so not the priorities that you need to be working on, but it feels much more, much more safe to be doing these other
yeah.
things and have to face the scary thing head on. They show up. I want to also be really clear that most of us will move through these responses, right? We're not always, demonstrating a single response and only a single response, but we tend to spend a lot of time there if we are running our business from a place of survival.
Yeah. I mean, I think over the years, witnessing clients and like you bringing this language in is, it's been interesting to notice what clients will internalize as a threat in business.
Mm.
And I noticed this happen a lot during like launch cycles or sales campaigns or sales events, or just even like dealing with rejection of somebody, like you raise your price and then somebody's like, no, I can't afford it. Like the how personal it can feel, or if they set a goal and they don't hit it, like it seems like it's like this threatening event when
Mhm.
it's, yes, you may not, like things may not have gone the way that you expected or the way that you had hoped or the way that you had planned, but it's like it's having a visceral body reaction in clients. And it's something I've just
Mhm.
like noticed over the years, especially even now working privately one on one. It's like I'm able, when you're in that close proximity, it's like, yes, there are strategic aspects that are going on, but there's also very human emotional reactions that are taking place. And it's like, yes, our logical brain might know, but I'm like, honey, your body's not safe.
Mhm.
And I started doing somatic therapy about like during my sabbatical over this past year. And it's like I'm now, I noticed how disconnected I used to be, like, and the way that I used to run my business. And now I'm like, oh, my body was treating that launch event as a threatening situation where it
Mhm.
was like this, I gotta make it. I'm like butt clenched. I keep using that as the analogy because that's like what I was. Like shoulders were really tight. My jaw would, I would just be physically tight in my body. And it's like,
Mhm.
why are we putting all this pressure on this launch? Like, just like, I don't even know what the exact question I'm trying to ask you is,
Mhm.
but it's just something that I'm just, it's coming up. And I think more like, especially my clients and people who listen to this podcast, many of them are doing self work. They're like navigating these things, but it still was showing up. I'm like, I don't know how do you help clients navigate that or reduce this pressure or be able to have the awareness to distinguish between these, like, yes, this launch is important, but like you're also safe. Like all this pressure doesn't have to be applied onto these in the ways in which we're projecting them onto our business, or our business now becomes this thing that has to save us.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a couple different things. The first, when you are describing, someone having a launch or someone not doing well on some sort of event or sale, right? And there's this full panic, it's usually because the meaning we're assigning to that launch, especially if you are someone who grew up in a home with parents who were cold or rejecting or chaotic, where there actually wasn't any kind of fundamental safety baked into the experience of being in your own home, and you develop
Mm,
that survivor self. all of a sudden your launches mean, am I good enough? Can I do this? Am I actually as capable as I think I am? Is somebody going to love me? Am I financially protected because I have nothing, no umbrella, no safety net underneath me to take care of me? It's not just one launch in the fall and you're going to launch again in 6 months. It's, am I actually okay? Am I actually safe? Right? And because all of our eggs get put into the basket of, is my business successful? Am I going to hit that certain number or whatever kind of metric we're using? The moment we start to drift away from that, or the moment that isn't achieved, it's incredibly terrifying, incredibly terrifying. It's not just a thought, right? It's like a full body experience of,
Yeah.
I am not good enough. I am not safe. This plan isn't going to work. I was kidding myself. Like these are all the things I hear of like, who do I think I am that I thought I could possibly do this? What does it all look like now? And so many of those conversations are really about bringing people back to the here and now, to the very present of like May 7th, 2025. What do you know to be true about right now? And what are the ways
Mm,
you are projecting the very real terror that existed in your home onto this one single launch?
yeah.
Does that
I'm
make
like,
sense?
it does. I mean, I can see some people like girls that are always that deep. And I'm like, maybe it
Mm.
is, maybe it's not. But like, what are some of those practical things that really help an individual get regrounded back into the moment if they do notice themselves getting activated? Or I also have some clients, and I feel like I can be this way. This is also why I went to somatic therapy. Is like I can over intellectualize
Mhm.
and analyze, and I can stay so heady that I'm like, no, I just need you to put your feet on the ground and just like be here for right now. Like stop internalizing it, slow down. Like what are some
Hmm.
practical things that can be helpful of either to the person who's like, girls are always that deep? And I'm like, it could be, but it could maybe not be. And just what are some practical ways to help get us recentered into the here and now?
Yeah, so the first thing I often hear like girls that are always that deep. And that's an interesting part, right? That comes online to say, relax, it's not that big of a deal. It's not really all about my childhood. And my first question always back to that person is, what are the ways that is that part kind of protecting you from having to feel something more here? Because it's not for
Ooh,
nothing that it's all of a sudden it's coming online to say it's not that deep. Like it's not that deep is such a minimization, right?
yeah.
I'm not
Which
going to
I'm
feel
also probably reflective of what your experience was like growing up.
100%. You are replaying, you are recreating those same dynamics, right? Because it's so
Yeah.
familiar. Especially if you were a child who had emotional reactions and your parents didn't know how to handle them. And so they minimized and invalidated them because they didn't know how to handle them, right? So they would say things like, it's not that big of a deal, you're being dramatic, you're
Yeah.
being too much, right? If you hear yourself saying those same things, it's probably a good indicator that your own childish shit is now at the table, right? Like there's something here for you.
Girl, it
Right?
is that deep, okay?
It is that deep, especially if you're resonating with other parts of this conversation, right? If you are someone who doesn't have trauma and the rest of this conversation has felt not applicable to you, then okay, maybe it's not that deep. Maybe it's something else. But if you're resonating with any other part of this conversation and you did have a childhood that we are talking about, that part of you that says, "Oh, it's not that deep," that part kind of sounds like it's coming online to protect you from having to feel something. From it
Mm,
seems like it wants to protect you and just wants you to keep going in the same way. It doesn't want you to threaten the survival system that you have established to this point of just pushing through and intellectualizing, right? So, like, maybe we just get a little curious about that part and what its motives are. Because, like, we are the sum of hundreds of parts, right? It's not just like that one part exists. So, let's learn about that part's intentions and motives. I just want to put that out there. If anybody is hearing that voice in their mind, that part has an agenda, just to be clear. And that's okay. All parts have agendas, but that part is an agenda. The second part of your question that I think is really important, and you said this earlier when you were speaking, you had said something to the effect of how do we just get people to see and to know that they're safe? Safety and that idea of being safe is a felt sense. I could tell you until the cows come home that you are safe, and you will not believe me if you do not feel it. You will not believe me if you are in your brain trying to intellectualize what to do with this next launch as I'm saying, you're safe. It needs to be
yeah.
a felt sense, right? So we actually have to slow down. And that's one of the biggest things that I'm teaching people to constantly do is like slow down. A regulated, calm, safe CEO slows down, right? They can take
Mhm.
in their surroundings. So if you are someone who's constantly acting from urgency, it's usually a good sign that your nervous system is being hijacked by fear. right? And we want to actually pause to feel safety. And safety can look like, especially, by the way, this only applies if someone is actually safe. If you're in an abusive relationship, if you are living in a war zone, if you are living in a context that is actually unsafe, don't do any of this. Don't listen to what I'm saying because you need fight or flight to keep you safe. That's the whole point of those systems, right? But if
Yeah.
you are safe,
I'm like, I
pause.
want to pause for a second because I think that is when I heard you name that for the first time and like really like if you are actually not in a safe environment, doing all this stuff is harmful for you right now.
Mhm,
And when I heard you say that, I'm just like, I don't know. That to me was like very permission giving to some degree. Cause I mean, I can imagine people who are living in situations right now that are actively currently not safe. Like their physical environments are not safe, but they're trying to counteract. And it's like, you can't override that situation. So I
mm-mm,
really want, like, I really appreciate you naming that because I do
mhm.
think it is important because there is like people who are listening who may be in unsafe physical environments right now. And it's like, what's wrong? And I mean, there is, I mean, not knowing how to navigate the dynamic, but it's like, that is first and foremost, you need to protect yourself.
Yeah, in those cases, we need to be thanking your body for keeping you in fight or flight, right? Like when
Mm,
you're in fight or flight, like your eyes zero in on the threat. You experience auditory exclusion, which means you can only hear things that are really related to the threat. Your body starts to create cortisol, adrenaline, like there's a full body experience. Your senses come into lock. You can feel things with more, things feel more tactile to you, right? You are getting ready to keep yourself safe. That is necessary if you are in threat, right?
yeah.
So we need to start to differentiate. Am I actually in threat? Am I in an abusive relationship? Is my house has the potential of being taken away from me? Am I living in an unsafe war zone? Right? All of these real things. If the answer to those things are no, then we can orient back to the here and now. Then we
Yeah.
can realize, pause, and say to ourselves, this is my age. This is the date. I'm going to take in everything that is the color red in my office, and I'm going to pause on each one and just notice it. I'm coming back to May 7th. I'm coming back to being 45, 55, 65, because here in this specific moment, I am safe. And we're
Yeah.
not talking about tomorrow. We're not talking about the future. We're actually just want to feel, we want to feel safety right here and now.
Yeah. And even like I keep going back to somatic therapy because it was just so it's been so different than traditional talk therapy. And I just remember coming into sessions and she'd be like, "Uh-huh, can you take a breath for a minute?" I was like, "Girl, why are you asking me to breathe? I gotta like let you know what just happened." And she's like, "Uh-huh." Like where do you feel this? Like what color are you noticing? Or where do you feel this in your body? Or like what is the weather condition right now to like describe what you're feeling? Or one question she asked me was like, if you had to describe how this felt to an alien, what would you say? And I'm like, girl, what do you mean? How would I describe this to an alien who doesn't have any context? But it forced me to slow down. Like it was like a pattern interrupt almost. And I just think like for the person, and I think prior to this, like I used to be terrified of slowing down. So I would just speed up, even though my body, like I think of right before I left for my sabbatical, my body was screaming, please slow down. And I was like, absolutely not, girl. We running. Like, it's like you notice it, but I was afraid of it. I think I was afraid of being still. I was afraid of sitting with myself. I was afraid of like exhaling. Like,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
it's I love what you're saying though. Like you somebody can't just keep telling you that you're safe. My financial advisor, you're safe. I'm like, bruh, when I hear about when you talked about safety net, and I know there's a lot of people in my audience, they are like low-key financial hoarders. Like they are like squirrels. They stockpile cash in all these different accounts and like they have money saved up in a lot of places because no matter how much is there, they have six figures sitting in a bank account. It's like, oh no, it's just sitting in that savings account earning 1%. I cannot move it. And when you said that, and it's just like, but get how can you I mean, I get the slowing down, but is there anything else or resources that people make? Maybe they do need to go to therapy, or maybe they need to switch up their modality of therapy that will help them if they are physically in a safe environment, they are actually safe, but they're having this dissonance with being able to actually believe it.
Hmm.
Where do
Yeah,
we
the
start?
first thing,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good question. And I think, okay, so the first thing, especially if you are someone who might be more of an intellectualizer, like getting information and actual education on what you're doing and understanding your patterns is actually incredibly helpful. Like when you're
Mhm.
talking about, for example, the person who hoards all their money, I see that presentation, but I
I
also,
add that's i.e. still to some degree me. I
right.
oversave. Like I oversave, but I do really resonate with like I need language. Like,
Hmm.
help me understand what it like, name what is going on, because that makes me feel empowered to some degree versus
Yeah.
like the more I knew, it made it more tactile for me.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Because again, like when we're driven by the subconscious fear, we don't have choice. We're just responding. And sometimes our own behaviors don't even make sense, or sometimes we rationalize them in a way that we think makes sense, but is actually so rooted in trauma and so
Mm,
rooted in fear. Because I mean, I see the two presentations. I see the person who hoards, and then I see the person who spends everything because it is way easier to live like you don't have it than to trust and hope that you're actually going to be okay. Right?
I think
It's
that
like,
come up with clients. It's like almost like a fear of success. It's like
yes.
they
Hmm.
will prevent themselves from making more money because they don't trust themselves to hold the more.
100%. They're tied into that is usually this feeling of like real scarcity from childhood where they didn't get to have a lot of fun experiences or any kind of like safety experiences where there's consistently food in the house, right? So they're just constantly overspending to remind themselves of like the power that they hold and that things are possible. Or it is like my bank account, looking at it, it has this number. I know that's not always going to be there. Let me get to that zero quicker so I don't have to sit in this weird anticipatory phase. Like these are all the things that the brain is doing to try and prevent you from having to feel more harm, more pain, right? So this is actually where, in terms of like a real resource, which I'm constantly saying to people, we all need mirrors. We need a mirror in some way, and this is where coaching and therapy is, there is no better mirror. You cannot read the label from inside the bottle, right? Even as a coach and a therapist myself, I obviously have all of those. I have a therapist, I have a coach, right? All of those things because I can't read my own blind spots. I need somebody to say like, "Hey Morgan, the way you are talking about this thing is also how you talked about when your partner did XYZ." And then I can realize, right, I am totally projecting or I'm totally recreating a specific dynamic to try and master an event.
Yeah.
We need mirrors. We need someone to say this is too similar. There's something happening here.
That is so good. I mean, Monique, in Monique's interview, she mentioned something similar about like talking about self concept and how we need to evolve our sense of self concept and how our relationship with our identity needs to evolve over time. And it's just like you have to do it in community. Like, I think too, like for so many individuals who are listening to this, and very much an identity I used to hold was like, I'm Miss Independent, INDEP. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need anybody else. And it's like, no, like the mirroring is the work. Like you said, like having somebody else help you recognize these patterns and bring that to your awareness. Um, I just this is so good. I'm like, I just want to pause here for a second for anybody else
Yes.
because I even as I'm going through this, I'm like, I just want to take a minute and just bask in this conversation.
Mm.
And all the realizations that you are bringing to this table and the dynamics that are coming up right now. And just holding space for anybody that's listening to this. And I just feel like Morgan, you talking fast and you dropping the gems even quicker.
Should I slow down? My bad.
No, I'm like, I just know this is resonating. Like
Hmm.
I know this is exactly like this is something I wish I had language on multiple years ago. I wish I would have listened to a podcast interview like this where somebody's just giving language and naming some of these things that you're experiencing, but you don't have words for. You don't even know what you're supposed to do with it. And you don't realize the pattern of how it's showing up and how you're operating your business. So I think that's the hard part. Like business is ghetto. Like it's ghetto out here. And there's so many things that we do in our businesses and as leaders and like striving for more or remaining content with what we have or overspending for whatever reason or not spending because we're afraid. Like so much of this stuff is our own internal, like our own
Hmm.
internal stuff. Like it's not business is quite simple, but when you add in a human component, like it makes it a little
Hmm.
complicated.
Yes, I'm often telling people because I work with a lot of people who are either entrepreneurs or executives in high leadership, right? Or sometimes working just like really um, jobs that like do demand a lot of them nervous system wise, like law enforcement or whatever it might be. And I'm constantly telling those who run businesses, like nothing breaks you open more than running a business. I'm saying this as a trauma therapist who has worked, across the board with many, many people, public figures, whoever. Nothing breaks you open like
Why do you
running a
think that is?
because especially if you're a woman and a woman of color, but if you
Yeah.
have a public facing type of business, right, where you have your face is there in any way, you you have to be okay with the perception of you being out there in a way where you do not have control. You have to be okay with putting all of your effort into a launch and it failing. You have to be okay with having seasons of not making money, right? If you come from financial scarcity or any kind of scarcity, like that's terrifying. But
Yeah.
there is nothing else that's ever going to force you to do that, right? If you're a salaried
Mhm.
employee, I mean, I was for many years of my life, and there is something a little nice about never having to question, like, is this paycheck coming or not? No, I know every
Right.
other Friday that my paycheck's going to be there, and I know that I get up at 8 and I go to work at 9 and I come home at 5, right? That there is such a safety to that that we take for granted that we don't fully realize. It really allows you to disconnect from so many things when all of that is
Mhm.
taken care of by some like figure in the sky, right? Some HR department somewhere is making sure you get your paycheck. Like once that's all taken care of, there's a way you get to kind of check out from that. But being a business owner, you wear every single hat and you have to be out there. Like it breaks you open. It questions who you are. Are you safe? Can you actually do these things that you're setting yourself out to do? And that gets at the core wound when you are a childhood trauma survivor of like, am I good enough? Am I lovable? Am I safe in this world or is someone going to harm me? Like it pulls on all the deepest strings.
Yeah, but what is the truth that you've come to realize? Because we still choose to sign up for this. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I think that there is something like brave and courageous about like starting a business in general, because there is a level of uncertainty or unpredictability. Like you said, there is a different version of risk that exists when starting a business. There's still risk in having a 9 to 5, but like it's a different version of risk. But I'm like, what do you say to the person like you're still choosing it and you are
Mhm.
coming up against these opportunities to be curious with these patterns that you might be noticing or these reaction or responses that you might be having? Like, I don't think that that's also by happenstance. Like,
Mm-mm.
yeah.
No, no, I don't think it's by happenstance. And the part of you that's choosing it is actually the part I want you to get more in touch with. The part that
Mm.
said, I need more and I'm hungry for something more. There's a part of you that is desiring that because you have a strong seeking circuit. That there is
Oh,
something that
yeah.
is
What does that mean? A strong
a
seeking circuit.
strong seeking circuit. It means there's just a thirst there. There's a hunger there for something beyond the mundane, something beyond the kind of everyday reality of being salaried, of not working at all. There's people will describe it, the people that I work with describe it as just like this switch inside them that when it's on, it's like it's not, well, sometimes it is insatiable, but it's just this drive for something to sink their teeth into. And I think that can be a really beautiful and beautifully harnessed attribute so long as we are staying in touch with that authentic state rather than, okay, I'm going to listen to my seeking circuit, I'm going to put myself out there, and then the moment something goes wrong or the moment I get scared, my trauma comes in to derail me from this authentic thing that I was actually really driven to do, right? These are the
Yeah.
people who I will often say, you like to take big bites out of life. You like to take big, big bites, and that's okay. Just sometimes we take a big bite and then we struggle to chew. We struggle to get it all down. But taking a big bite is great. It tastes good. You get filled up. There's nothing wrong with taking big bites, but we need to be honest about what it means to be someone who takes a big bite and how can we properly get through that versus having the trauma stuff come in and derail you entirely until you know you're doing it wrong. What's wrong with you? Nobody's actually going to want this or nobody's actually going to want you. We got to stick with
Yeah.
that part of you that's authentically driven for more.
Mm. Something that you said too about like people who grew up without trauma.
Mm.
I'm like that. I mean, I know I'm like circling way back, and I'm totally asking this for my own sense of
Yeah.
self here. So I think too, moving to California, I've been meeting so many people that just have a very different way of life than like people I would meet on every day in Michigan. I'm like, there's just it's less of a threatening environment in general. Their version of crime out here is just very different than what like typical crime would exist in Michigan or in Detroit. And I'm just like, is it do people grow up without trauma or have do all of us experience some version or level of trauma, may be different from person to person, but like are there people
Mhm.
out here who just like grew up secure and
Well, yes. Yeah, there are. So there's a couple things. There's people who grew up zero trauma, great securely attached to their parents, no financial issues. Life was chill, right? Like things were just good. There is absolutely those people. And then there are people who grew up with trauma and went through traumas, but because they had secure attachment and because they had that safety net under them, they didn't experience traumatization. Then there are people who
Oh,
went through trauma and did experience traumatization because they did not have that buffer to protect them, to insulate them from the effects of the trauma, right?
wow.
So it's why two
I'm
people
so
can,
glad I
yeah,
selfishly
it's
asked you this
complex.
question because I'm like, how does that happen?
Yeah, yeah,
I've
yeah.
been meeting people like one of the girlfriends I've just recently made here in California. I'm like, girl, just like, what was like, just tell me about your childhood because I don't think I've ever
hmm
met anybody until meeting her where I'm like, you seem like you
hmm
just grew up in a really healthy environment. Like,
hmm
that just blows my mind that I'm like, there are people out here who are, but I love the distinction of what you said. It's like they may have grown up in a securely attached environment. Everything was kind of good. There were no external threats versus people who grew up in threatening environment and traumatic experiences, but they had a safety net. So they weren't traumatized.
Right.
I like that was like such a good
Yes.
distinction.
Yeah, it's why two people can go to war, experience the exact same thing, be in the exact same team, go through the exact same stuff, and they'll come back, and one might have acute stress, might struggle, but will successfully kind of integrate back and not experience a ton of
Mm.
traumatization. The other will have full-blown PTSD, will struggle with trauma symptoms for the rest of their life if they don't get help. And usually that person grew up in poverty, didn't have a strong, secure attachment with their parents, right? Doesn't have a place to come home to where they feel accepted and loved. Those kinds of things, they create real buffers. The sooner that we can reconnect with someone after experiencing a trauma, someone that is safe and who we love, the less likely we are to develop PTSD. So there's
Wow.
trauma, the event, like we're going to all go through a car accident, right? Or we're all going to go through something significant and painful. But then there's actual traumatization, which is the presentation, which is the wounding that
Mm.
takes place and the scarring that takes place within the body.
What have you noticed from the pandemic? Because I feel like there's been
Mm.
like this delayed effect or reaction that I've been noticing in the space, noticing with clients, noticing with peers. That's like slightly different than people who were immediately laid off or lost their jobs or like there was this hard halt because of the pandemic versus people who were having like this delayed ripple effect of it. Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that like, I would classify the pandemic as a traumatic world experience. Like, how do like events like that or how kind of what have you noticed in regards to the pandemic as it relates to
Mm-hmm.
clients that you're seeing today, high performance today, business owners today?
Yeah, a lot of people, I mean, first of all, the pandemic was a collective trauma. And yes, there were certain regions that were more affected and thus had higher rates of traumatization, higher, more severe presentations of post-COVID
Mm,
traumatization. But for what I'm seeing anecdotally, especially with the people that I work with, a lot of people lost themselves and lost a part of themselves. They'll describe going into the pandemic as being social and connected and maybe even liking themselves and moving their bodies and knowing their place in the world and knowing that they belong. And then we went through this like several year period where all of that was taken away and we haven't yet recovered. And those who might have run businesses during that period found a lot of identity, especially because online businesses did so well during COVID, right? They
yeah.
found an identity in being that hustler and starting that business or succeeding in that business. And now they're coming out of that of like, okay, but who am I? And what's my worth outside of my bank account? And do I have to keep working at this level because I can't keep going? This is exhausting. But the moment I stop, the moment I question what my worth is, and so I just stay stuck in this hamster wheel. The delayed
Mm.
reaction really I'm seeing is really wrapped up in identity and like who am I when I am not working from this place of survival?
Yeah, I'm really glad that we took some time to like name that or talk about it because it's something that I feel like I even went through and I've noticed in clients go through like that they're really this what you labeled as like this identity dynamic that is going on. I feel like it's just so true for a lot of us. It's like who am I now versus who I showed up and chose to be as I was like leading my way through this really uncertain time without really knowing when it was gonna end. And I was watching some documentary or something, and they were just talking about the difference between this and like 9/11. It's like 9/11 was like it was an event, it was a moment in time, but like it didn't linger on for years per se. Like it happened and like, okay, buildings crash and it's traumatic, but like COVID and the pandemic, it's like we don't know when it just kind
Mm-hmm.
of kept drawing itself out. And I
Mm-hmm.
really just wanted to hear your perspective on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there
So,
was something about COVID that was really terrifying because we were told at certain times, okay, we can come up for air. No, wait, everybody go back in. right? And if you think of coming up into safety, or sorry, leaving safety to go up into fight or flight, and then coming back down into safety, then going right up back into fight or flight, like crossing that barrier constantly over and over is really taxing to the nervous system, right?
Mm.
And it's at some point people begin questioning, is it even worth it for me to come back up for air, or should I just stay in my, survival state, in my trauma-based identity and not come out because it's painful to have to keep coming back up for air and then being kind of forced back into it all over again.
Yeah, I think this whole conversation is like, I think many of us listening, myself included, and thank you so much for coming on.
Of
I'm like, this
course.
has been so juicy and delicious. It's like we have this resilience and this grit in us, but this is like a different version of resilience and grit of like your emotional stamina to be able to hold space for the trauma, hold space for the reaction, slow yourself down enough to hold space for the stillness. And it's like
Hmm.
I don't know, like it's a different, I think many of us are used to like work, go get the degrees, work hard, be successful, climb the ladder, like play the external capitalism game. But this is like a different version of work that a lot of, I think what makes us successful in that external world, if we can apply some of those same characteristic traits or those same like identity markers, can be really supportive for us through this internal work. But like, I don't know, is there just anything else you have to say to somebody who is either in the thick of it right now, who's like, girl, I'm doing the work and it's hard AF, or like for that woman that's like, okay, you've read me for filth. My edges wear, like I'm now bald headed. Thank you so much. Um, like where, like I don't know, just what do you have to say to that woman that's like maybe in the
Hmm.
thick of it, or is like knowing they're being called to do this type of work and to have these mirrors and to do more of this self reflection, but it feels like just really, really scary, maybe. So I think the
Yeah.
other thing, I'm going to say one more thing. I think that other thing
Yeah.
that comes up in conversations is like, if I've attached so much of my identity to this version of me, and now I'm like, okay, I need to maybe create some distance, create some space. Like, I'm afraid of who am I going to become? And what is it going to mean when like this version of success no longer is the thing that fuels my identity anymore. Like
Mm.
I think that's one thing I've been navigating over the past year. Just I'll keep it 100 with y'all. I'm like, well, who am I? Like, who am I gonna
Mhm.
become? Like, I don't know that version of her. I mean, I know she's in me, but like, I don't have like, as close. She doesn't have as prominent as a forefront relationship in my awareness. If I let all those pieces of me go, like if I let that struggle go, if I let the trauma not drive the ship anymore.
That's 100% what I was going to say is
Oh,
usually people who are listening and we're at this stage of like, okay, I kind of get it. Like now what? The biggest block is this fear of like, but if I stop and I don't keep going at this level, or if I heal my trauma, w will I just burn it all down? And will I not be who I currently am? Who will I be if I'm not working from this place of trauma? And will I lose my edge? Will I not be as successful, right? Will I
yeah.
choose to go like live on a farm somewhere and join a commune or whatever, right? In reality, most of the time I'm telling people you are not successful because of your trauma. It is not because of your trauma that you became successful. There are traits within you that have absolutely contributed to your success, but it's because of your trauma that it's actually blocking you from being able to
Mm.
dig into your business in a way that's actually sustainable, in a way that's actually going to activate some of that creative flow where you come up with your best ideas, right? When we are in fight or flight, our decision-making ability is cut in half. We have so much brain fog. We can't have meaningful connections because the body doesn't want to connect when it's in fight or flight. We do not make good decisions. We make everything out of panic and urgency. We are not our best selves when we are in fight or flight, but there's often this fear of like, but I'm not gonna have my edge anymore. I'm not gonna be as successful. You will likely be, and I see this time and time again, way more successful in metrics and using metrics that actually matter to you and actually feel good when you start to work from a place of healing and true self
Yeah.
rather than false survivor self. So I think that person who's like, okay, but like, what's next? First of all, ask yourself, do you even like yourself right now?
Mm.
Do you even like this version of you?
That part.
Like, we got, like, do you even like this version? Because this version, she sounds a little overwhelmed. She sounds like she could use a vacation. I don't even know if you like this version of you, right? I'm constantly having that
Wow.
conversation. If you don't, that's some good data for you. We should probably do something about that, right? So
Mm.
if you don't like that version, there are many versions of you underneath all of these trauma responses that are very excited and very wanting to come out. But we need to heal and soothe the trauma first.
Okay, I'm like one other thing I had to circle it down in my notes is this, because I feel like too, even with social media right now, with I feel like everybody and their mama, like therapy and going to therapy and doing the work is like mainstream, it seems like now. It's no longer this necessarily as big of a taboo as it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But I've noticed where it's like people will then start to productivity ties or product ties, I
Hmm.
don't know. I need to heal. Like, is it
Hmm.
like, and what I've been having to work for myself is like, Jerisha, this is not it's not like a finish line. Like, it's not like you heal this trauma and like you've now won this new game where you just kind of be like the perfectionist when it comes to self-care. Like, is trauma something that can be quote unquote healed? Like, does it finish? Does it end? Like what is the reality
Mm.
that we need to maybe open and hold more space for when it comes to healing trauma?
Hmm. So that depends on how someone's going to be defining healed, right? For me, if when I hear people ask me that question, usually what they're asking is, can I go back to the version I was before the trauma? And
Mm,
or can I never have a symptom related to my trauma again? Can I never have a thought, a feeling related to my trauma again? No, that's not going to happen, right? If someone um what's a good example? If you're this is such a silly example. If you're stabbed on the street, right? Even when that heals, there is a scar. And every time you look at that
yeah,
scar, you're going to feel a type of way, right? It's healed. You're not bleeding out anymore. It doesn't hurt as much, but there are feelings, there are thoughts associated with the fact that that scar is still there, right?
yeah,
So we're not looking for going back to a version of you pre-trauma. And a lot of people are grappling with this when it comes to accepting the COVID pandemic, because we're not trying to go backwards and find that version of you. We actually have to make sense of this current version of you, right? We have to
yeah,
actually integrate this version of you. So it's not so much about healed, it's about healing. For me, especially the schools of thought I work with, the work is never done. It's never
yeah.
done, right? But there is a there is a what is that word? It's I'm losing it, but there's a level, right? There's a threshold where we start to see significant benefit, right? No, maybe no more rumination, no more resentment. You're not moving through life so fast. Safety is more of a part of your nervous system baseline, so you sleep better. You don't have so many anxious thoughts. You're not sweating so much. Your heart rate isn't racing. You're not so irritable. Like there's some real metrics, but we can't come at this as like, okay, I'm gonna achieve. This is an achievement.
That's
Yeah,
exactly what I'm
I'm gonna
trying
have a
to say.
checklist.
Like,
No.
girl, this is not another like gold medal that you get to get.
Mm-mm.
Like, it's a, and I love
No.
what you said. It's not healed ed, it's healing ing. Because
Hmm.
like you're
For the rest of
human.
your
Like,
life.
yeah, like you're still experiencing life and things are still gonna happen, but it's just like, do you have the tools to help you navigate these dynamics differently in a
Mhm.
safer, more secure way than maybe how you would have handled them historically?
Yeah, the answer that like when people ask me, what does a healed CEO look like, or what does someone, who's worked through all their stuff and now they're having leading their business look like? It is someone who has choice, who is not at the
Mm.
mercy of their panic or their fear or their survivor
Ooh.
self. If you have choice, if you can say, okay, thank you, so and so VA, I'm going to take this information, even if it's for 1 minute, and just sit on it and reflect and make a CEO decision, even if that information is about how someone just made a major mistake. If you have choice and option on the table, you're healing. When you
That's
are simply reacting over and over again and you don't feel like you have a choice in how your body feels or reacts or what your mouth says, that's a trauma response.
ooh. I'm so glad we ended it on that because I feel like this has been so good. I'm like, Morgan, what do you have coming out right now? I know there is a program that is currently, doors are about, when this drops, doors will be open for.
Hmm.
But where can people learn more? Where's the best place to take a next step with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Morgan Pommells. That's two M's, two L's in my last name. My program, Freedom from Fight or Flight, doors open in 5 days. That's a group coaching program for the adult children of emotionally mature parents to really heal your nervous system and to come out of survival mode so you can be that version of yourself that you've always longed to be, but struggles to come out because the trauma is hijacking all of it. Otherwise, yeah, you can find me on Instagram and binge my content and send me a DM or send me an email.
Oh my gosh. And your podcast?
Ah, yes, I do. You're right. I have a private podcast. It's new, so I always forget. I have a private podcast. So yeah, come to my content and and comment podcast on any post, and I'll send it to you.
Okay. Thank you so much for your generosity and for this conversation. I can't wait to play it back. This is so good. So just thank you for being here.
You're so welcome.